I want to talk about mass migration again, primarily because it seems to be a pervading topic that has occupied the airwaves, particularly on Sky News, over the last week since the rallies last Sunday. So I'm going to show you a little clip that's going to just set the theme, I guess, around what we mean by mass migration. And then I'm going to endeavour to provide you with what I do on the Tony Tompkins Show, with facts about what the word mass migration means. So I'm going to play this initial clip from Danica DiGiorgio talking about mass migration to give us a sense as to kind of where the right wing's coming from in relation to all of this.
I spoke earlier about how it's not racist to be proud of your country or to talk about how out of control rampant migration is, particularly when everyday Aussies can't get into houses. But I thought National Senator Matt Canavan summed it up today. He said the vast majority of the Australians marching last week are not against migration, they are against mass migration. Yet Labor ministers lined up to accuse the protesters of spreading hate. The isolated voices on our fringes are not the greatest threat to our social harmony. It's the powerful voices with an agenda to marginalise our unique Australian way of life. David, I think he's absolutely spot on.
Nailed it. And I mean, I'd add mass immigration without capacity. Mm-hmm. But they're not in favour of, they're not against immigration. And for the Labor Party to then go and criticise the marches for being racist, have forgotten that last month there was a march headed by Labor politicians that were calling for the death of people.
Yes.
That were carrying flags that were on the verge of being illegal in this country because they inspire hatred themselves. And the only flag that was carried by last Sunday was the Australian flag. Mm-hmm. So I think they're being very, very hypocritical about it.
And let us not forget, while we're having this interesting debate, that also there were, at the rallies on the weekends, there were Nazis, there was a right-wing effort to be able to paint immigrants as being a problem within this country, when, as this guy later on says, we're all immigrants, and so we are. So I wanted to therefore have a conversation about what all of this means to all of us, and what mass migration actually means. So there are two words that politicians throw around like confetti at a wedding, except instead of celebrating, they want us to panic. But what does it actually mean? And more importantly, how is it different from the everyday migration that's been shaping Australia for actual decades? What does all of this actually mean to all of us? So today we're going to break it down. What mass migration is, what regular migration is, and why governments, especially ours and the opposition, love to spin the difference for political gain. And it's not just about the Australian government, it's about also how this is being used by the right wing. So let's talk basically about the basics. Mass migration simply means the large-scale movement of people from one region, country or continent to another within a short time. It's not just a family moving for work, it's thousands, sometimes millions, moving because of war, famine, persecution, or in many cases these days climate change. So think about the Syrian refugee crisis or the Irish famine exodus. Those weren't slow trickles. They were floods of people seeking survival. So that's what mass migration means. By contrast, regular migration is the steady, predictable movement of individuals or families, often voluntary, and usually through visas, work programs, or family reunification. That's the trickle. Mass migration, remember this, mass migration is the flood. And that's what a lot of people don't seem to be able to understand. So, let's talk about how Australia frames this. Our migration system has two big streams. We've got skilled migration. This is the famous points test, age, English, skills, qualifications, and whether you've got a job we desperately need you for. doctors, engineers, IT workers, tradies. This is migration as an economic tool. That's the first one. And then there's family migration. That's about spouses, kids, parents, carers. It's capped, and the waiting lists can be years long. But it's part of our social commitment to families. Together, these streams make up about 185,000 permanent spots per year. That's regular, orderly, planned. What governments call nation building. And then there's this other category, which is an important category also, and that's refugees and the humanitarian intake. So Australia takes about 20,000 refugees and humanitarian entrants every year. Many come through UNHCR, a system from camps in Africa, the Middle East and Asia. These are people escaping persecution, war, and in many cases these days just disasters. But here's the kicker. If you're an asylum seeker who arrives on shore, especially by boat, suddenly you're no longer framed as a refugee or in need. You're painted as part of a potential mass migration threat. And that's when governments wheel out the big word: border crisis, floodgates, and of course, as we're very familiar, stop the boats. It's important to note the numbers are tiny compared to our skilled migration program, but politically they get blown up bigger than a Sky News headline at 7 p.m, as I've just shown you. Those headlines are massive, but they're wrong. So mass migration is just political spin. Here's the ticker. The term mass migration isn't defined in law. There's no line in the Migration Act that says more than 10,000 people equal mass migration. It is simply a political label used by both sides. And politicians use it whenever migration feels too fast, too large, or too disruptive, whether that's true, a true example or not. So there are a couple of examples of this. So post-World War II, populate or perish was the slogan. That's what a mass migration push, but it was sold as a patriotic duty. John Howard in the 2000s, we would decide who comes to this country, framed boat arrivals as a national security crisis. Right now, 2023 to 2025, migration levels get linked to housing shortages, cost of living and wage stagnation. Suddenly, mass migration is the scapegoat for every economic headache. So do you see the pattern? Regular migration is the steady good for the economy kind. Mass migration is the scary, chaotic, blame the government kind. Same phenomenon, different spin. So why do these distinctions matter? And I think this is a really important point, because as we know with politicians, the language shapes policy. When migration is framed as regular, we get structured programs, skilled visas and point tests. When it's framed as mass, we get detention centres, offshore processing and endless political football. It's not really about numbers, it's about narrative. One builds a nation, the other builds fear. So, what does all of this mean to all of us then? So next time you hear a politician or a media outlet shout about mass migration, ask yourself, is this really a flood or just a regular trickle of human beings looking for a safer, better life? Migration has always shaped Australia. It always will. The question is whether we let facts guide the conversation or fear. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, do what you should be doing. Hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who thinks migration policy is just about stopping boats. Trust me, it's a little bit more complicated than that.